Okay, this is AP Psychology, Chapter 8, Learning, Part 2. We left off where we were beginning to discuss the importance of cognitive processes in classical conditioning. Pavlov and Watson considered consciousness or mind unfit for scientific study in psychology. However, they underestimated the importance of the cognitive process in the biological constraints of the animals. Research indicates that for many animals, cognitive appraisals are important for learning. That is, thoughts and perceptions are important to the conditioning process. For example, animals appear capable of learning when to expect an unconditioned stimulus, and their awareness of the link between the stimulus and the responses can weaken associations. The early behaviorists believed that learned behaviors of various animals could be reduced to mindless mechanisms. And so what we're going to do is describe some of the ways that biological predispositions can affect learning by classical conditionings. The early behaviorists view that many natural responses could be conditioned to any neutral stimulus has given way to the understanding that each species is biologically prepared to learn associations that enhance survival. Thus, humans more easily learn to fear snakes and spiders than fear flowers. Rats develop aversions to taste, but not to sights or sounds. And conditioning occurs best when conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus have just the sort of relationship that would lead scientists to conclude that the conditioned stimulus causes the unconditioned stimulus. Later behaviorists suggested that animals learned the predictability of the stimulus, meaning they learned expectancy of awareness of a stimulus, as recorded by Rescorla in 1988. Pavlov and Watson believed that the laws of learning were similar for all animals, therefore a pigeon and a person do not differ in their learning. However, behaviorists later suggested that this learning is constrained by the animal's biology. And John Garcia did a series of experiments with rats where he would give them saccharine water, and he showed that the duration between the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus may be long, as much as hours, but yet still result in conditioning. A biologically adapted conditioned stimulus of taste led to the conditioning and not to others like light or sound. Even humans can develop classically conditioned nausea, as we see in this chart that the unconditioned stimulus is the drug. This is common with cancer patients. When they receive the drug, they get nauseous, and that is their unconditioned response. So the conditioned stimulus of sitting in the waiting room waiting for their drug, and then of course they eventually get the drug, and the drug ultimately results in nausea. For some cancer patients, they will begin to experience nausea as soon as they begin to wait in the conditioned stimulus of the waiting room. And so their conditioned response is nausea even before receiving the drug. Pavlov's contribution to our understanding is that Pavlov taught us the principles of learning. They apply across species, and that classical conditioning is one way that virtually all organisms learn to adapt to their environment. Pavlov also demonstrated that significant psychological phenomena can be studied objectively. Finally, Pavlov taught us that conditioning principles have important applications such as how to treat fear. So Pavlov's greatest contribution to psychology is isolating these elementary behaviors from more complex ones through their objective scientific procedures. So now we're going to describe some of the classical conditioning to improve the health and well-being of humans. This is our hero, John Watson, the guy who did the Little Albert experiment. Watson used classical conditioning procedures to develop advertising campaigns for a number of organizations, including the Maxwell House Coffee, making the coffee break an American custom, and the slogan "Good to the last drop." Um, so conditioning principles provide important insights into drug abuse and how it may be overcome. Classical conditioning works for the body's disease-fighting immune system. For example, when a particular taste accompanies a drug that influences the immune response, the taste by itself may come to produce those immune responses. Watson's Little Albert study demonstrated how classical conditioning may underlie specific fears. And today, psychologists use extinction procedures to control our less adaptive emotions and conditions new responses to emotion-arousing stimuli. Alcoholics may be conditioned diversely by reversing their positive associations with alcohol. As we saw in the last chapter, we can use drugs to make for an aversive response to the consumption of alcohol to try to help alcoholics with their problems. Through classical conditioning, a drug plus its taste that affects the immune response may cause the taste of the drug to invoke the immune response within individuals. We try to identify two major characteristics that distinguish classical conditioning from operant conditioning. The two characteristics that help us distinguish the two forms of conditioning are following. In classical conditioning, the organism learns association between events that it does not control, and responses are automatic. In operant conditioning, the organism learns associations between its behavior and the resulting events. The organism operates on the environment. So here what we see is the samples that we gave earlier. The classical conditioning forms between the stimuli, the conditioned stimulus, and the unconditioned stimulus. The operant conditioning, on the other hand, forms an association between behaviors and the resulting event. So the sea snail associates splash with the tail on it and receiving a shock, and then learns to begin to retreat from the splash as soon as he feels the shock, or to prevent feeling the shock. And then down here we see the seal. He balances the ball on his nose, and then he expects his fish, and then he wants to balance the ball some more because seals like to eat fish. Operant classical conditioning. Classical conditioning involves respondent behavior that occurs as an automatic response to certain stimulus. Operant conditioning involves operant behavior, a behavior that operates on the environment, producing or rewarding punishing stimuli. So here what we're doing is we're identifying these two major characteristics to distinguish classical conditioning from operant conditioning. The two characteristics that help distinguish the two forms of conditioning are following. In classical conditioning, the organism learns association between events that it does not control, and the responses are automatic. In operant conditioning, the organism learns association between its behavior and resulting events. The organism operates on the environment. So in classical conditioning, you're getting a natural, uncontrollable response. But with operant conditioning, the organism is learning to behave a particular operation in order to receive its reward. Thorndike invented these boxes here that his cat would come in and have to figure out how to get out of the box. And Thorndike developed the law of Thorndike's law of effect and its connection to Skinner's research on operant conditioning. Skinner's experiments extended Thorndike's thinking, especially his law of effect. This is a law that you should make careful note of. This law states that rewarded behavior is likely to occur again. And so this is where the concept of positive reinforcement or oftentimes leads to quicker learning. So using Thorndike's law of effect as a starting point, Skinner developed operant chamber or Skinner's body to study the operant conditioning. These are the boxes, examples of the boxes that Skinner would use. He would put a mouse or a pigeon or whatever type of animal in these kind of things, and the interaction with the speaker and the light and the lever, and the lever would release food when the proper sequence of behaviors were emitted. And then of course there's always water available too, because you don't want thirsty mice. Okay. The operant chamber or Skinner's box comes with a bar or a key that the animal manipulates to obtain its reinforcer, like food or water. The bar or key is connected to the devices that record the animal's responses. Edward Thorndike's law of effect states that rewarded behavior is likely to recur. Using this as his starting point, Skinner explored the principles and conditions of learning through his operant conditioning, which behavior operates on the environment to produce rewarding, punishing stimuli. Skinner used the operant chamber, or Skinner's box, in his pioneering studies with rats and pigeons. Shaping is another experience that it becomes an important part of learning. So what we're going to do is describe this shaping procedure and explain how it increases our understanding of what nonverbal animals and babies can discriminate. In his experiment, Skinner used shaping, a procedure which reinforces such as food, guide an animal's natural behavior toward a desired behavior, by rewarding responses that are ever closer to the final desired behavior. Successive approximations and ignoring all other responses, researchers can gradually shape complex behaviors. Because nonverbal animals and babies can respond only to what they perceive, their reactions demonstrate which events they can discriminate. So shaping is an operant conditioning procedure which reinforces or guides the behavior towards the desired behavior through successive approximations. A rat shaped to sniff mines. The manatee is shaped to discriminate objects, different shapes, colors, and sizes. And so what they gradually reward them, and with each successful performance of an operation, they lead more and more towards the correct behavior. There are different types of reinforcers. Any event that strengthens the behavior it follows. The heat lamp is positively reinforces the meerkat's behavior in the cold. So the meerkat finds that there's this heat lamp and he likes to get that, so he goes and gets his suntan on. So operant conditioning term is positive reinforcement. The description is we add a desirable stimulus. Possible examples of positive reinforcement are getting a hug or receiving a paycheck. One of the important things I want you to remember that whenever anything is a positive reinforcer, it is something that has been added in. A negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is the removal of an aversive stimulus. Fastening a seatbelt to turn off the beeping sound in the car. You want to get that sound to go away, and that's that negative reinforcement. You come in late, so your parents take your phone away so that you learn the curfew. That's negative reinforcement, that kind of thing. Now we're going to compare positive and negative reinforcement and give an example of each of a primary reinforcer, a conditioned reinforcer, and an immediate reinforcer, and a delayed reinforcer. A primary reinforcer, an innately reinforcing stimulus like food or drink, where a conditioned reinforcer is a learned reinforcer that gets its reinforcing power through the association with the primary reinforcer. A reinforcer is an event that increases frequency of